what I hope isn't too much of a half-formed thought about Noach to bring up. And really, in a sense, maybe it's just an appendix on previous shiur, because we had talked previously about hunters and the apparent preference that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has not to have his chosen people be a nation of hunters who will bring their offerings to him from the game that they hunt. Where you have going down through Yishmael and also Esav this selection of the other one instead of the bowman or the hunter, and also with Yakidah you can make that case. And we were talking about Nimrod a little bit, but that there's this sense in which there's something problematic about hunters, and we had argued previously that perhaps that has to do with the fact that if you're a hunter, then there's no way of disentangling the moment where Hashem gives you a bracha from the moment when you have to kill, when you have to take a life. And while it's true that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu does want us to take a life, if you're a shepherd, then that means you actually spend a lot of your time caring for and nurturing other creatures. And then, yes, it's true, sometimes maybe you take the life of one and bring it as a korban and roast it and all of that. But that's not an inseparable aspect of it. Whereas if you're a hunter, you don't have anything to offer Hashem except that which you kill. And so there's more of this inseparable connection in that case between violence or the taking of a life on the one hand and some kind of relationship to the divine on the other hand. And that, I think, we were arguing unavoidably leads to a certain kind of viciousness and idolatry and things like that. But at the time, we were tracing that from looking at Esav and the substitution of the Gdi, the sort of the kid that Yaakov has prepared for Yitzchak instead of the game that Esav would have hunted, or the substitution of the ram, the Ayil, for perhaps implicitly an Ayal that could have also had its antlers tangled in a thicket and been trapped the way that kosher hunted game would have to be trapped. So there are these moments later on, but I was thinking about it more, and that actually strikes me that there's quite a lot of this going on if you go back to Noah. And really, it might be something quite basic that we're getting from the Torah about the human condition and the kind of relationship that HaKadosh Baruch Hu seeks with humankind as a whole. So why would I say that? One of the things that you could use to argue this, one way of starting it off, is to say that there really is, we usually think of kashrut, of keeping kosher, as being something that you do if you're a party to the Brit of Am Yisrael, of the covenant of the Israelites with Hashem through the Torah. And then you have all these rules about what you can't eat. You can't eat ostriches, and you can't eat iguanas, and you can't eat camels, et cetera, et cetera. And that has to do with the Kiddusha of Am Yisrael, the holiness or the separate, special distinctiveness of Am Yisrael as an Am Kadosh. But then the question arises, is there such a thing as a kind of kashrut that has to be observed by all of humanity? And we don't think about that much, because at first it seems like the answer is no. It's sort of obviously the case that people are allowed to eat whatever they want. But that's not actually quite true. There is one mitzvah that is kind of like kashrut for all of humanity, that's given at the time when Noach comes out of his teva, out of his ark. And that is, as we eventually understand it in the oral tradition, in Torah, what's called Ever Min HaChai, the law of not eating from a live animal or eating the blood of an animal that's still alive, but also, I mean, essentially the blood of an animal that's still alive or also just biting into a live animal, those kinds of eating are not permitted. And interestingly, although the whole idea of Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 commandments given by Hashem to all of humanity at the time of Noach, that we get from Torah Shebal Peh, from the oral tradition, and the enumeration of those 7 laws, which includes things like setting up courts of justice and certain kinds of sexual morality and etc. That those things we have to learn from the Talmud because they're not necessarily explicitly mentioned in the Torah, but there is explicit mention, in fact, of this last, or I don't know if you should call it last, but this mitzvah we just mentioned, the kashrut for humanity of Ever Min HaChai. We have this in Sefer Bereshit, Kol remes asher hu hai lachem yeh le'achla ki yerek esev natati lachem et kol ach basar b'nafsho damo lo tochelo. Okay, so every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, even as the green herb have I given you all these things. But flesh with its life, which is its blood, you shall not eat. Ach basar b'nafsho damo lo tochelo. Right, so, and that comes right on the heels of the other one of these Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach that you shouldn't murder. So it also talks about, shofech dam ha'adam be'adam damo yishafech ki b'tzelem Elohim asa et ha'adam. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So we have these 2 things that do make it into the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach that are explicitly mentioned here. One of which is kind of a kashrut, like don't eat just this one thing, which is the blood of a living animal. And also don't murder people or don't kill people who you don't have some kind of properly legislated reason to kill. So now the question is, what is that telling us about this theme that we were bringing up with the hunter? And I think once you start thinking in terms of hunting, you start to realize that this is about, if you want to look at it a certain way, forbidding human beings from being animalistic predators, right? That from a certain perspective, humankind, you could think of as just being a certain species of animal, a very smart kind of animal, and a kind of animal that, because it's very smart, can become the master predator of the earth. And that's certainly technologically now the case. Human beings have the ability to kill every kind of animal that they would possibly want to kill. And in various circumstances, almost always do. That there are very few animals that can be eaten on Earth that haven't been eaten by some people. And there are certainly animals on Earth that are more difficult to hunt than others, but people have figured out, even since a long time ago, how to hunt ones that are much bigger than them, using their intelligence, their technology, their strategy, etc. So you can have, a tribe of cavemen pull down a woolly mammoth or whatever, and that kind of thing. So if we're talking about the human being construed as a species of animal, then human beings become the master predator of the land, even if they don't present as such. When you look at how scary lions and tigers look, it turns out actually we're more versatile predators than lions and tigers. And we can shoot birds out of the air, and we can go deep sea fishing, and also shoot lions and tigers if we want. It's something that is deep in our humanity, that this is a capacity that we have. And I think it's quite interesting, therefore, that not only is it the case, obviously, that the whole beginning of humankind's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu begins with this question about what you can eat, right? Like even in Gan Eden, it's about this fruit, this one fruit you're not allowed to eat. So maybe that already is the beginning of kashrut, but we don't really think about it or dwell on it much because once you're out of Eden, it doesn't really seem to be relevant anymore. Like we're not going around looking at the trees and saying, "Oh, it's dat Torah. We're still not allowed to eat it. No person is allowed to eat it." It becomes very abstract and dreamlike, and we have to work hard to figure out what it's referring to in the present day, if anything. Whereas in the post-Noah world that we're talking about now, these are mitzvot that still apply to all of humanity according to the Torah. And yes, we have more kashrut that places more severe restrictions on Am Yisrael, but if you talk in terms of all of humanity, there is one law of how to be a kosher human being, and that is Evel Min HaChai. Don't just pick up a live animal and take a bite out of it. And that exact behavior is somewhat cartoonishly, but still also quite seriously, the behavior of a predator animal, right? That animals, which are predators, don't first kill their prey and then clean and cut up the carcass and then cook parts of it and all these things that people now do. But we sometimes think of the reason that we're doing that as, oh, well, it makes it taste better. Or maybe also we do it because of hygiene. You're worried about getting sick if you don't cook things. Like those are all good reasons to cook meat. But it's interesting that also at this same moment when Noah is being given this mitzvah of Evel Min HaChai for all of humanity, really right before that, the first thing he does when he gets off the ark out of the teva is V'yiven Noah mizbeach l'Adonai v'yikach mikol habehema hatehora u'mikol ha'of hatahor v'ya'al le'olov b'mizbeach. So Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean beast and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. V'yarach Adonai et reach hanihoach, v'yomer Adonai el libo lo osif lekalel od et ha'adama ba'arvor ha'adam, ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra mini'rao, v'lo osif od lehakoth et kol hai ka'asher asiti. So I think that there's various things that one can make out of this pasuk. I am curious about it for other reasons, that we may do another shiur about this question of what it means. So it says, and Hashem smelled the pleasing odor, and Hashem said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. That's how it's often translated. And it really is always troubling, this question of what's the point of all of this if this is telling us something that happened that will never happen again, right? That has nothing to do with the way the world works now. Maybe there's some point to reading it that way, but it also just doesn't even make sense on its face. Like if you could just compare to the destruction of stone, the same words are used in describing the destruction of stone. There's an association with shachat, like slaughter. There's an association with matar, like either rain or something raining down from heaven. You have a mass destruction, and it is there's this whole discussion about whether there are enough tzaddikim and who's going to be saved, associated with stone, and Noah is described as a tzaddik b'dortav. So there's numerous intertextual connections that call your attention to the fact that at some level the destruction of stone is very much like the Noahic flood. It just is not happening across the whole earth. And so maybe you could say, oh, it's just a matter of scale. And so now HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises that he won't do it in such geographically large terms, but that doesn't really make sense in terms of what comes next, which is Od Kol Yimei Ha'aretz Zera U'Chatzir U'Kor V'Hom U'Chaitz U'Horef U'Yom U'Layla Lo Yishbothu. So when earth remains, seed time, harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. that's not really saying I'll only do this in small localized areas. It's hard to get that, I think. And so in one sense, it seems like the model of the Mabul is really telling us there's something fairly universal about the Mabul, that the Mabul is a model for Hashem's destructive, like mass destructive judgment. And his promise somehow not to do it again only goes just to a certain distance, such that we still get things like Stom being overturned in a manner that, very much reflects the same kind of narrative arc of, things have become totally wicked and it has to be destroyed. And so one separately could talk about exactly, how to read these psukim we just read and understand that. But leaving that aside and just assuming that works for the moment and say, okay, this is a model for how Hashem relates to humanity going forward. It's not just about the past, but there's something in understanding this sort of essential model that we get from the Mabul, from the Noahic flood, that's going to teach us about what Hashem really has a big problem with. This moment where we're about to be told about don't murder people and ever min achai, don't pick up a living animal and take a bite of it, but that's preceded by Noach making korbanot, making burnt offerings to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what that's underlining is that there's something essential in the relationship between humankind and korbanot that is also wrapped up in this hunter thing and this desire that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for humankind to not just be a kind of master predator species. And once you start pulling on that thread, you realize, well, it really runs back and forward from Noah, because you both, on the one hand, have going backward this whole question of, well, who is this guy Noah? What just happened? He just got off the Teva, as we've been talking about. What was happening before that? He had all these animals with him on this Teva, right? All the land animals are there with him in the Teva. And you have this interesting disproportion where they go 2 by 2, except for those animals which are suitable for sacrifice. And those come in enumerations of 7 rather than what we get, the more famous kind of 2 by 2 from all the kids' songs, where we're talking about these other animals. I don't know, bats and frogs and such, assuming the frogs needed the help. And so we're talking about a redefinition of what the purpose of all animals is that's happening here, which we're seeing before our eyes, where we started in this pre-Noahic condition, where presumably this mitzvah that's about to be given with Erev Min Achai was not in application somehow, and that implicitly this was kind of in the background of what was wrong with humankind, right? That there was no kashrut post Gan Eden, and what it meant that the land became totally corrupt and wicked, and the people were just bad all the time. That somehow this is connected with their relationship to the whole animal kingdom, right? That they just look at all the animals and they just see it as a menu, right? Now, I'm aware there may be people who would read this completely the opposite, and they would say, "Oh, well, we were vegetarians and no one knew that they had permission to eat animals until after Noach, and that permission to eat animals after Noach somehow is invented at that moment." But I really think that's reading more into the text than is there in the Chumash itself. In Chumash itself, it doesn't say, and humankind lived, on the land between Adam and Noach, and they never ever ate animals. It focuses on the agrarian aspect, that they were, working the land. They were trying to farm the land and trying to make it productive, sure. There's no explicit statement that they didn't eat animals. And this statement about a kind of kashrut and Hashem giving reshut, giving permission to eat animals afterwards, I don't think that implies that there was no eating of animals beforehand. It just implies that there was no eating of animals as part of a relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. That was part of how one understood one's role as a human being in the world. And so I think it's from the text of Chumash itself, it's perfectly plausible to say, sure, there were animals, and fine. If some people, I'm sure, wanted to eat them, could eat them, did eat them. And it wasn't worth noting, except for the fact that when we come up to the flood and we just say the earth has become this place of violence and corruption, of Hamas, of Shahat, the thing that Akadosh Baruch Hu has a problem with is left a little bit vague, but I think we can read it out of this whole issue with the animals, that Akadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Noach, first of all, take all these animals and take with you food for them. Take responsibility for animals. Care for them. Nurture them, right? Feed the animals. Let their lives depend on your life. So you're not simply someone at a buffet where you don't know where they came from, why they're there, how they got there. But now that they're there, you're going to satisfy yourself in whatever way you're inclined and devour them and be a master predator and use your godlike intelligence in order to just make yourself better fed. Instead, adopt the role again in this substituting, between hunters and shepherds way that we were referring to before. The same way that a shepherd maybe is more of a nurturer who does a better job caring for animals. Even if sometimes a shepherd will also slaughter an animal, he will care for the animals much more so than he does violence to them. He will make sure that they can find food and water and go look for one when it gets lost. And that's why, by the way, Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech were shepherds, right? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants leaders of Am Yisrael to principally be experienced in the nurturing and caring aspect, the responsibility, seeing the whole flock and knowing who needs what, and trying to figure out how to help the group and keep track of what's going on and all of that. That's not the mindset of a hunter, right? The hunter's just waiting to find something worth killing and then kills it at the moment he finds it. So there is more of an emphasis on nurturing that's already being given to what's being asked of Noach. He takes the animals in the teva, and there's a redistribution, right? Because you have different numbers of animals depending on whether they're tahor or not. That the animals that are tahor, you have this notion of a 7 instead of a 2, because there's something that is special about these animals, which is their purpose for use in korbanot, right? Mikol habeima atehora tikach lecha shiva'a ish ve'ishto umin habeima asher lo tehora hi shnaim ish ve'ishto. Right? So you are taking animal kind and you're making this redistribution that's saying, okay, yes, part of this is about people need to eat, and part of this is about the world needs to be full of a diversity of animals. So the 2 by 2 is about just reproduction and the presence of different species. But then there's these other animals where 7 is not just we want more of them. It's 7 because it's the number of creation. It's saying, like, what's the purpose of creation? Is the purpose of creation just to have a bunch of animals? No. The purpose of creation, which now Noach is being asked to re-emphasize in this redistribution of the animal population of the Teva, the purpose of creation is actually, the purpose of the animal kingdom in creation is to provide basis for relationship between humankind and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is not obvious, and it was missed by humanity before Noach, at least in large part, one might say. But now what Noach is doing is reaffirming that all these animals They're all going to owe their lives to humankind. They all are our wards, and it's our responsibility in a sense to protect and keep them and care for them. We're not just consumers and predators and devourers. We also are caretakers. We feed the animals, so to speak. But also that the point of this is not just to run a zoo for its own sake, but because some of these animals will provide the basis for a relationship with Hashem. And that is their purpose. And that is also why it's worth it to save humanity and the teva full of animals together, because they in combination can accomplish something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu found it worthwhile to create the world to accomplish, right? He's willing to wipe everything else clean and just start over, so to speak. And yet, when doing so, he's saying, this is the part of the world that actually had a point. That's what we're keeping. That's what we're carrying forward. It was the part of the world where there's someone who can recognize Hashem, who's a human being, and who can use that capacity to recognize Hashem to seek relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to also take responsibility for the world and to care for it, including to care for animals, and to be nurturing instead of predatory. And that's the beginning point of everything else that comes after that. And as a result, you come out of the teva, you have korbanot, you have all these korbanot that Noach makes from all the tahor animals that he brought on the teva, all of these appropriate animals for making sacrifices to Hashem. And you also have this law of kashrut given to humanity, which is basically just saying, don't act like a predator. Don't just catch the rabbit in your teeth and bite into it, because you're not an animal. You're a human being. You're made b'tzelem Elohim. Don't murder people and don't act like a predator, even towards other animals, because this is not about your gustatory satisfaction in an animal sense. This is about the possibility of your having a relationship with your creator. And interestingly, we are forced to recognize that shift again as a kind of substitution away from the hunter, away from Yishmael, away from Esau, away from the more predatory kind of behavior, and in the direction of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And this explains just two last things to me that always seemed a little puzzling to me. One of which is that there's this mention of Nimrod, the great, king of Bavel, and when Nimrod is described, he's called a hunter, but he's not just called a hunter. He is, it says, "V'chush yalad et Nimrod, hu hehel lihiot gibor ba'aretz, hu haya gibor tzayid lifnei Adonai, al ken Ya'amar Nimrod Gibor Tzai Lifnei Adonai." So Cush fathered Nimrod, and he was the first on earth to be a mighty one. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. This is after Noach, right? Because Cush is descended from Ham, and Ham is the son of Noah. And so you have, in this post-Noach world, this mention of a great king, this king of Bavel, Nimrod, who in Midrash is battling Avraham and everything, or Avram, who has not yet become Avraham in that part of the story. But the point is that it's so puzzling. What does it mean that Nimrod is a hunter lifnei Hashem, right? Why mention that, right? He was great, but is it just that he was such a good hunter that somehow Hashem puts his name on that? That doesn't make sense at all. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't just put his name on people because they are mighty, they're titanic, they kill a bunch of things and put it in a big pile, and if the pile is big enough, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will put his 4-letter name on that. No, that doesn't make any sense at all from everything else we know about the Torah. So what does it mean that Nimrod is a mighty hunter lifnei Hashem? Well, it's interesting because in other contexts, what does lifnei Hashem mean, right? There are other contexts where people eat lifnei Hashem in the Torah. And what that means is that they're eating in the Mikdash, in Yerushalayim, they're doing something that has Kedusha to it, right? They're like bringing their fruits and eating them in Yerushalayim. They're eating sacrificial meat on Har HaBayit. Lifnei Hashem means you're seeking relationship with Hashem through your eating. And the interesting suggestion here, I guess, is in that case that the point is Nimrod was not the first hunter. Nimrod was the first hunter who somehow sought relationship with Hashem through his hunting, right? Who might actually have brought sacrifices from hunted game, who had some notion of eating his hunted meat lifnei Hashem. And that shows you that it's not like actual hunting was gone from the earth the moment that humanity was given this mitzvah of Ever Min HaChai. But the point is that Nimrod was not a savage jumping on top of a live animal and biting into it. He was doing something more elevated. He was a step in the direction, maybe a step in the right direction in the progress of humanity, even if we see him as an antagonist and still, we don't think of him as an ideal, that he was a hunter who was capable of seeking relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in some way through the greatness of his achievements as a hunter. And that possibility already is a post-Noachic step, that becomes possible because Noach brought to the world the idea that your eating isn't just about your satisfaction as a hungry animal and as a master predator. It's also about your recognition of your sustenance coming ultimately from your creator and having gratitude for that and seeking relationship with him through that, and everything that's wrapped up in all the possibilities of actual korbanot on an altar, on a mizbeach. So I think that's one point that it at least provides a hypothesis for that I never felt satisfied about before, is why mention he was a hunter lifnei Hashem, but it makes sense that he's this first mighty hunter after Noach. And that makes it so that now we're somehow, yes, maybe there's still hunters, but hunting is becoming a bit more elevated. And as we go down through the generations and we discard Yishmael and we discard Esav because of their wildness or their brutality, because they still are hunters who maybe even more so have a chance at relationship with Hashem. But Hashem is saying, I don't want my special nation to be based on hunters who have a relationship with Hashem. I want shepherds and farmers. And here's why. That is a process we're seeing going all the way down from Noach, down through Avraham to Yitzhak, and then to Yaakov, when we finally break free from Esav and really select the shepherd farmer as the model for the society that's going to provide the basis for proper relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on his mountain in Yerushalayim. Last thing I'll just mention is everyone knows about, maybe the favorite aspect of the passage with Noach on the end of the Mabul is the keshet, right? The rainbow, as we frequently call it, because it's in a cloud and it's after a big rainstorm, so we focus on it being a rainbow. But now that we've been talking about hunting for half an hour or however long it's been, when we hear the word keshet, it suddenly seems, that also is part of the story here, right? That Hashem calls it kashti, my bow. He doesn't say my multicolored rainbow. It's Vayomer Elohim zot od habrit asher ani noten beni uvenechem uven kol nefesh haya asher idchem לדורות עולם. את קשתי נתתי בענן והייתה לאות ברית ביני ובין הארץ. So this is, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for everlasting generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a brit, a covenant between me and the earth. והיה בענני ענן על הארץ. ונראתה הקשת בענן, and it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, and that bow shall be seen in the cloud. וזכרתי את בריתי אשר ביני וביניכם ובין כל נפש חיה בכל בשר, ולא יהיה עוד המים למבול לשחט כל בשר. So I will, when it shall come to pass that I bring a cloud over the earth and the bow shall be in the cloud, I will remember my brit, my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. וראיתיה לזכור ברית עולם בין אלוהים ובין כל נפש חיה בכל בשר אשר על הארץ. ויאמר אלוהים אל נוח זאת עוד הברית אשר כמותי ביני ובין כל בשר אשר על הארץ. So there's this emphasis of all flesh that's on the earth, which is, and mentioning explicitly, it's a brit with not just Noach, but with the animals, which obviously it has to somehow involve the animals and not really be something the animals are particularly aware of. That, he's saying, this is the sign of the covenant I've established between me and all flesh that's upon the earth. And what it's emphasizing, I think, is that it's his bow, right? He, in his own way, was acting as this kind of unrestrained master predator over everything. He was saying, look, you humankind, you think that you have the capacity to just kill anything that you want and consume it? Well, I can do that to everything on earth. And look how. And when I'm doing that, look what's going to be in the clouds for me to show you how I did it. Here's my bow. It's like I'm the hunter now, and you get to know what it's like to be hunted again, because I'm showing you my bow, which happens to be a rainbow because it has to do with the way that he, dealt with the situation most succinctly and straightforwardly. And the bow is also, because it's a brit of a promise, because you don't see the bow when it's just raining. Like, in other words, when the arrows are flying, right? It's as though the raindrops, in a sense, are becoming kind of the arrows of the bullets. And when those projectiles are flying and all you have is clouds and rain, you don't see the bow, right? So you see the bow when there's a break in the clouds, when there's sun, when maybe the rain is passing, when it's over. And so it's associated with HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of saying, look, I'm staying my hand. I'm not going to just wipe you out. But you need to remember that I can do that I have done that before, that I could do it again. Like I will do it in Stone, for example. So there is only a limited promise that I'm not going to do this again. Maybe it's a sort of limitation of scale in geography and time, whatever, but I have a bow and I'm going to use that bow to become the master hunter when you are acting like you've forgotten that the world is nothing but a buffet for you as, the master predator who thinks he's in charge of everything. And so it becomes this grand theme, I think, that is leading into the creation of Am Yisrael through Yaakov, who has parted ways finally at that last moment with his hunter brother, and that finally is going to create the nation, where it's about saying humankind ultimately has this capacity as a master predator. You can relate to the world where it's all about, I have my intelligence and my skills, and I, by myself or collectively, even better in a group, we can be powerful enough to take whatever we want and devour it. And that can be the point of life if you want to turn it into that. But when we operate that way, when societies operate that way, that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, now I'm going to take out my bow. Because if a society operates that way, it has no right to exist anymore. The way that this is emphasized is by demonstrating through the events in the life of Noach that there is a reforging of the purpose of humanity that redefines the purpose of animals, not just to be as food, but as the basis for relationship with Hashem through sacrifices and korbanot, and which clearly was a lost idea. I mean, you haven't mentioned in the case of Cain and Hevel back in the beginning, but there's a reforging of that commitment and that relationship at the time of Noach, and also there's an additional level of understanding that humanity are meant to be nurturers, are meant to be like shepherds who maybe sometimes still kill animals and make offerings, but are ultimately caretakers and responsible parties, and that's also part of what Hashem expects of them. And this all rolls together, in such a way that many elements of what we hear from Noach, including even the keshet, even the bow, become associated with this this theme of turning away from the predatory aspect of the human condition and the capacity human beings have to act that way, and towards the nurturing shepherd who seeks relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in gratitude for the sustenance that he ultimately provides.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.